office boy my senior year for the local Biloxi Gulfport Daily Herald, which is now the Sun Herald, at 50 cents an hour pay. That was the minimum wage at that point. And the editor, Cosmonaut Fred, let me cover some of the minor stories that the primary reporter, particularly in sports, didn't want to cover. In other words, Pee Wee League games or junior high games, I got even a couple of high school games when the big fella, Jack Nelson, couldn't cover it. So I had some that way, and I worked summers for the newspaper. And then 2 years of college, the first 2 years of college, I majored in journalism. I say majored, it was toward an AA degree at a junior college, but had plans of going to the University of Missouri, which was a renowned journalism school at that time and still is. So that's where my next stop was going to be. But the Korean War had come on. And that's when I decided to enlist and serve. And my dad sort of always recommended I become an officer, a commissioned officer. And the only program that fit for my age and 2 years of college at the time was the Naval Aviation Cadet Program. So I signed up, of course, like typically of an 18-year-old, not thinking too far ahead. I had never been in an airplane in my life, not even sitting on the ground. So that was a little concerning when I got into pre-flight the first 4 months, and all these other members of my class were talking about their experience just flying light airplanes or something. And it was like some of the things they were talking about was like a foreign language. But I got smart through pre-flight, about the way the world of airplanes worked and some specifics on the airplane I was fixing to fly. But the bottom line is the first flight, I loved flying. I mean, it was just magical. First time I went up with my instructor, Hank Chenard, in 1952. And so I just, in my mind, it immediately made a 190-degree turn and said, somehow my life is going to be involved with aviation. There was no space program, see, at that time. So that veered me off in that direction anyway. So it's kind of accidental.
Yes, and that was 1952, you say?
Yeah.
So how old were you then?
I was 18. I had graduated from high school at 16. So I was finished 2 years of junior college at 18. And
oh my goodness.
So that was the only program I could go into at the time.
But then I thought you were a Marine fighter pilot.
Yeah, when I graduated, I was a Navy cadet in flight training and like enlisted, effectively an enlisted person. And when you graduate, which really constitutes the second time you qualify on the aircraft carrier and advanced training, then you get your Navy wings, gold wings, and you also get commissioned in whatever service you've chosen, which is limited. That has to be the Navy or Marine Corps. And so I chose the Marine Corps because I knew I could get fighters or attack. It turned out how that happened, when I finished basic, you go to Corpus Christi to sign in. And you go to this office, and there's just a yeoman there, an enlisted fellow. And he has a book in front of him. He flips open. And he just assigns you random as you come in for what the open slots are. And he was going to assign me to seaplanes. He'd asked me, he said, are you a Navy cadet or a Marine cadet? And I said, I'm a Navy cadet. So he was going to assign me to seaplanes. So I said, where's the Marine office? So he sent me down the hall to a major, and I became a Marine cadet. So that assured I got fighter or attack. And so that's how that happened. My dad was Navy, and he was merchant Marine for 12 years. So he was kind of wishing I'd have stayed Navy, but I didn't want to fly seaplanes.
Right. You wanted to be where the action was.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So what kind of action did you see? Did you fight in the Korean War?
No, I did not. I missed it. Some of my compatriots did. Buzz was in the Korean War, and so was Neil, in fact. One Navy, one Air Force. Mm-hmm. By the time I graduated in April of 1954 from flight training with that second carry qualification, the war armistice rather, had been signed about 7 months, I think, before. So the war was over effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So I never got to see combat. Kind of been one of those things I've always felt a little guilty about. Particularly later, I got recalled at one point for the Second Berlin crisis when I was in the Air National Guard. And many of my friends who stayed in that time, they were reservists like I was, but they stayed on active duty. They ended up in Vietnam. And so I missed that opportunity. So I always felt a little guilty that I never got shot at or got to shoot at anybody.
I think that probably you had some experiences in your life that more than compensated for your share of risk on behalf of our nation. So what took you from wanting to go to Columbia, Missouri to Oklahoma? How did you decide to finish your education there?
Okay. As I was nearing my 4 years in the military and several years of that in the Marine Corps, serving in 2 fighter squadrons. I was in VMF 114 and VMF 533, which incidentally, the current director of Kennedy, Cabana, he served in 533 also, but only in Vietnam later. So we were both served in that same Marine squadron. But anyway, I was thinking of getting out, and I talked to a lot of people what to do next. And talking to squadron commander, and I was reading books about things, about Chuck Yeager and things going on in the research world, I decided I wanted to be a test pilot. Well, the first criteria is you need a degree, because to have the right stuff, part of that requirement of your resume is to be an engineer of some sort. So I now thinking of going back to school on the GI Bill, and I searched around, and my first choice was at the time was the University of Michigan. They had just opened up what they called Aerospace Engineering School, which is now common, but they were kind of the first school to get out front on that. But I wanted to keep current flying at the same time, and preferably high performance aircraft. The Battle Creek was the nearest unit, reserve unit, and they were full up. And there was a waiting list, so I knew I'd probably finish school at the University of Michigan before I could ever get in the unit. So I started searching around, and Oklahoma, the 185th Fighter Squadron at Oklahoma City, had 2 openings. So that's how that happened. So I ended up signing up there and went to school, engineering school at the University of Oklahoma, which is just down the street at Norman from Oklahoma City. So that worked out where I could still retain flying experience and high performance aircraft, summer camps, still weapons deliveries and, practice and training. And so keeping current, if you will, while I was going to school to get the aeronautical engineering degree.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned wanting to be a test pilot, and of course, that was a qualification for the original Mercury astronauts.
Right.
So all of that was going on while you were making these decisions and taking these steps in your career. The Mercury program was evolving.
Well, not really. When I went back to school, it was 1956.
Oh, okay.
So Mercury and NASA did not exist. In fact, my squadron commander in that Oklahoma fighter squadron had at one time been associated with NASA Langley, and NACA, but that was before it became NASA.
Right.
And he's the one that encouraged me to try to get to apply when I finished school with NACA rather than a company. And his rationale, it turned out he was correct. In a company, you'll normally work on a new airplane that might evolve through design development for 4 or 5 years before it comes to the point you're actually going to fly and test it. Whereas at NASA and NASA pilots aren't called test pilots, they're called research pilots. Because the NASA's approach is you take existing airplanes, modify them in some way to either test for better performance or for safety or something like that. So you'll end up flying more test programs in more variety of aircraft. So, and it's an exception, like the X-15 was a unique program. But so anyway, that's when I got that idea. So the year I was graduating in '59, I guess, actually in '58, NASA became a reality, and the Mercury program was thought of to be the first thing up to bat. And so in '59, when I graduated, the same thing again. I searched around and actually flew to different centers. I would Air Guard, I could get an airplane, and I would visit Langley, and I visited Ames Research Center. And I found out there without going that the Flight Research Center at Edwards did not have pilot openings. So it turned out that the only opening I found was at Lewis Research Center, which is now Glenn, at Cleveland, Ohio, which turns out to be the first assignment Neil had. Neil started at Lewis, and Neil went to Edwards, and so I followed in his footsteps, only about 3 years behind Neil. So I started to work at Lewis in '59, and like I said, was there 3.5 years, and then went to Edwards. They finally, I kept asking if they had an opening, because that's where I wanted to end up. That was kind of the high premier flight test operation NASA had, was at Edwards, at the Flight Research Center, now named after Neil Armstrong. Anyway, I ended up there. And then in '66, applied for the astronaut program. Actually, I think in late '65 was the applications. And was selected in '66 to make another move. Now, for us, Neil, we were both NASA employees. So it really wasn't changing anything. In fact, I didn't get a raise or anything else. I kept the same GS rating and same, there was no astronaut label on the Civil Service Registry. So when I went to join the astronaut program, I kept the same title. I was Aerospace Research Engineer and Pilot. That was my research pilot. That was my title, with the same GS grade I got to at that point at Edwards. And I'm sure Neil did the same thing. Now, Neil, it's interesting. I thought hard about whether I wanted to apply, because Neil had come back to visit at Flight Research Center one time, and I had not got to talk to him, but Don Melick, a good friend, fellow pilot, talked to Neil and asked him, what's it like being an astronaut? And Neil, in his slow drawl, just said, well, you attend a lot of meetings, you sit in a simulator a lot, and there's not much good flying. So that was Neil's description, and he was right. He's right on. When I say not good flying, down at peak time I had, and I used 2 pages of my monthly flight log, took 2 pages to tell the month. I flew 9 different kinds of aircraft in 3 different test programs while I was at Edwards there. So, I was flying almost every day in something different even. So I was leaving all of that to just go fly the taxi cab T-38 around. Or the T-33 we also had when I joined the astronaut program. We finally got rid of those. But we were using them like, transportation. So it was not very exciting. And of course, you really don't fly very much. I mean, the good flying is to fly a mission. And it's a long time between missions. Yeah. So anyway, I finally decided what steered me was the thought of Apollo and the lunar mission. That truly was unique enough, and thought of a great adventure that I wasn't going to get to participate in any way unless I applied. So that's what convinced me I should apply.
So thinking about those meetings and sitting in simulators and the way that NASA evolved, which I think is fascinating, from just the structure of and the bureaucracy that evolved in order to pull all these disparate teams and people together. And so in the Mercury program, it seemed to be very different in culture if you will, than it was for the Apollo program or the shuttle program. And do you think that that's just, I am such a layman, I know that, but that's my observation.
I personally can't attest to that because I was not part of Mercury. Mercury was done. They were into Gemini about the time I joined and selected in April of '66. I think that was either just before or just after Neil and Dave Scott flew that flight where their Gemini went awry with the stuck-on thruster. Mm-hmm. So that's when I joined the space program. Mm-hmm. And other than that, I hadn't paid much attention to it otherwise, other than what I saw in media, whatever, up until then, because I was busy with other flying things. So that was kind of, I didn't have any part of Mercury at all. And the only time I did meet him at Lewis because we had developed the Mastiff. This is this rotary thing with multi-gimbals. They put them in and could spin them up, and they had to practice stopping their rates using a hand controller just in case their capsule went out of control on orbit. So we developed that at Lewis for their training for the Mercury guys. So I met them as they came through. And but that was my only association with the Mercury people at all, was that aspect. Mm-hmm. And unlike the movie, I don't think the Gemini guys ever trained on that. The movie, Neil's movie, they had them coming up and using that machinery, the Mastiff. I don't think they did. Mm-hmm. Only the Mercury guys.
Well, and I think that is where a lot of my perception is just from books, or I read, and I knew you weren't part of Mercury, but I read the engineer's report from Liberty Bell 7 just when I was doing a little research for one of our exhibits. And to me, the thing that seemed to change was that the role of the astronaut seemed to change.
What?
The role of the astronaut seemed to change. It was more of not a partnership, but there seemed to be more interaction and more relevance of the role of the men in the spacecraft to mission control. Go ahead.
And Apollo, what obviously cemented that, although I didn't have any problem, I was already at Grumman, intimately involved in limb testing, was the fire. When the fire in the capsule happened, where the astronauts maybe had not been as intimately able to be involved in the decision process through the development, that kind of swung the tide that way. Now, I was, as you'll see when a book that's coming out, I hope, you'll see about my time at and Ed Mitchell and a system engineer named Dave Ballard in our almost year and a half at Grumman. Involved in the testing of the lunar modules, the kind of participation we had and input, I think was fully a partnership with the Grumman team, test team. So I think the fire though hastened that. No argument, the crew should be intimately involved, which is true of a test pilot, and that test pilot obviously doesn't do necessarily structural design of the airplane, but they're heavily involved in the layout of the cockpit, all the systems, functions, contingency procedures, all arguing about failures and what you might do in case of what your plan B. So that's all pertinent for just the design of any airplane, as well as a spacecraft. It's just a part of the way the business is done.
How do you think that kind of partnership and that sharing of your perceptions and opinions, how do you think that impacted, if it did at all, the communication after the crisis occurred on Apollo 13?
I don't think it did at all. I mean, if Apollo 13 obviously has a lot of notoriety because of the nature of the failure we had and the workarounds that had to be done. But if you would look at the total Apollo program report, which is a pretty thick document, which you get by Freedom of Information, there's appendices, and one of the appendices, this is long after I left NASA and had some time to thumb through that kind of stuff, One of the dependencies was anomalies, which are failures of various sorts, some very minor, that are listed by mission. And if you ignore Apollo 7 and 8, which only had one spacecraft, they did not have a lunar module, so it's kind of cheating to count them. But if you look at all the vehicles, missions that had 2 spacecraft, Apollo 13 in total had the second least of anomalies. So I say many of them were very minor, like an instrumentation. Now you might also say, well, we didn't give our command module much chance to have any more anomalies because it was out of business for 4 days. But that was the business as usual, really, on flights. We almost aborted, as you probably know, we almost aborted Apollo 14, and we almost aborted Apollo 16. So we almost had 2 more landing aborts because of problems that occurred on those flights that had to go through some machinations to figure out ways around what they were dealing with. So it was kind of the nature of our game all through our training. We trained with almost every training cycle we had, which we trained for launches or entries or on orbit or landings. A special team was in place called SimSoup. That was probably about a dozen people. Jay Honeycutt, I think, led the group during Apollo initially. They spent their life, they were very devious people, thinking of the right mix of failures and the right timing to make us look bad. I say us, crew and mission control. And that was for almost every sim. And so, we always knew going to sim that something bad was going to happen. We just didn't know what it was or when it was going to happen. So that was throughout our training, that was the mode of operation. So we were all pretty versatile with dealing with problems as a result.
Do you think that if you had then even a tiny bit more technology, for instance, if you had a visual contact with some of the people who were solving the problem of the CO2 scrubber, what do you think you had to do because you didn't have those types of resources available? What skills did it take?
Well, if we take the scrubber itself, about the only thing that would have been handy if they could have sent us a picture. Mm-hmm. And I was not involved, incidentally, unlike the movie, which had me ripping the bag or something. I was off duty. Jack and Jim created that plenum to go on the hose. But so they had to be very careful in the wording and also be there talking with the crew as they were doing it to change the words into the fabrication that they ended up with. It would have been very helpful to have had a picture of their finished product to see kind of what it looked like when it got done, which they didn't have. So that was quite a feat of the FAO, which was the guy, the people in mission control that had to write the procedure to get it right, so to speak, to help at least keep them on a sort of right path. But also if they ran into a little spot to stop, I think Joe Kerwin was on, he had talked to him with the other expert there about what now to do next, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. The number of people that it took to come up with that solution and round the clock, because it had all the time codes in the report that they just worked.
Everything was that way. It was to the wall. Many people I talked to when I got back, they got less sleep down here than I got in flight because of working certain problems, and they had deadlines when they were sent off for a task. Krantz would, they were given deadlines of here, you got to be back here by now, so we now can start testing it in the simulator or work up procedures. So they were under very difficult timelines to work the problems. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm grateful, as I'm sure your family is, that their solutions worked out.
Right, yes.
Yes. Well, back to you have several firsts, and I want to talk about that, but tell me about being involved with Apollo 8. I know you're a backup limb, but that's probably again, as very much a layperson, but that's my favorite mission because it all happened, as you said, to the wall. It all happened so quickly and it was so intense. And all of you involved were taking probably the greatest risk.
Right. Well, I can only say that it was, can't speak to the risk part. It was the toughest training cycle I had because obviously I joined the crew, the backup crew by default, if you want to call it that. Mike Collins had a medical problem. He got moved out of the prime team. He would have flown the flight normally. And Jim Lovell got taken off the backup team and moved up. So he became the command module pilot on Apollo 8. That allowed that opening, and they let me fill it. So Deke asked me to fill, and I was certainly happy to do it, as the backup lunar module pilot on Apollo 8 with Neil and Buzz. So Neil and Buzz and I were the backup crew. Now, the reason I say it was tough for me was you have to realize I'd spent a year and a half working on a limb. Right? I knew it backwards and forwards. I knew more about the limb than I needed to know to fly it. And here now, I'm now in a command module. In fact, when I joined the crew, I went out to Downey and participated in some tests. It was on an electrical system. That was the first time I'd been in a command module. I'd never been in one. So I was starting from ground zero on learning even the parts of the vehicle I had to know, which was from the right couch, which was electrical system, comp system, environmental system, etc. So I was starting from scratch, so to speak, even on just basic system knowledge. So anyway, that was, for me, it was a tough job getting through that. Bill Anders helped me a lot. We tested each other a lot in the simulators when we get spare time. And so that helped get me up to speed. So I was really very late toward launch that I felt in my own mind competent enough to, I felt I could have filled in for Bill if he had to be removed to go fly the flight. So that was the toughest mission to get ready for me, just from that aspect. It was also tough in general because the mission changed. When I joined the crew, we were, at the time, we were Apollo 9. We were not Apollo 8. We were going to fly Earth orbital with a LEM, Earth orbit mission. It happened to be unique. I think it had a very high apogee in the rendezvous sequence of something like 4,000 miles up. But at any rate, aside from that, we were obviously doing the mission planning, the flight plan, mission rules, all that kind of stuff for that mission. And for about 6 weeks, when all of that changed, and said, "Okay, you're going to the moon," and it was flip mission. So it's kind of great for me because I started my first crew assignment was Apollo 9. Within 6 weeks, I'd moved up a flight. I was Apollo 8. so I said, "Wow, I'm getting ahead here." And so anyway, now it's like starting a little over with the mission plan and the mission rules and so on and so on. So it's a lot of, I call it meeting time, getting that sort of procedures and all of that squared away. That slowed up what you call the real training time, which is when you have a good checklist, everything's kind of static. So we lost probably another almost month of getting ready the stuff we're going to really train to. And so that's what put us in, and Frank Borman realized that for very long, and he put us on, he changed from call it a normal 5-day a week with maybe a meeting day back in Houston with mission control. We went to 6 days a week. And literally most of the last 2 months, we were at 7 days a week getting ready for that flight. And I'm talking about days starting at 8 in the morning in the simulator, ending up at 10 at night from meetings. So that's the way it went, getting ready to go fly that flight.
And as that flight occurred, what was that like being, you were in mission control during Apollo 8?
Right. Yeah, the traditional role of a backup who is trained to fly the flight and knows a lot about the flight plan and the procedures and whatever, is to be in mission control just in case something went wrong, that you might be firsthand able to help. It just turned out that I was just a witness because nothing seriously went wrong. So I just got to be a first-hand witness in mission control during that mission through almost all the sequences.
And tell me about that. What was the spirit of having that succeed?
Well, obviously it was exciting because this is the first time, like the first time they did the new thing was TLI, where they did the maneuver to actually leave the Earth, and of course then to see the first pictures of the Earth receding and getting smaller as you went out. And of course, really amazing, obviously, their lunar orbit time and Christmas Eve, and a very profound thing that I was not aware of that, incidentally, that they were going to do the reading. They did. So I'd not been part of that preparation, if you will. It was done, I think, by Frank. I think went around and got opinions of sort of what he might do and how they might do. And and of course, the pictures of the moon were incredible. I mean, see that bleak-looking feature and see the Earth so small there in the background, but beautiful in comparison. So that was kind of profound in that respect. But also that everything seemed to work pretty much as advertised, including the thing people worried about to some degree was our lunar navigation, our navigation capability, and for particularly getting back in the entry corridor and that kind of thing. Everything worked pretty much as we hoped and expected, which kind of proved the whole concept, at least in terms of just getting to the moon and back. So in that one mission. So that was great. And the command module, of course, was worked as advertised. And there was obviously every mission had a critical time with the command module that had to work every mission to get you home. So that burn to get out of lunar orbit was always dependent on that SPS engine that you hope worked, because once you'd used up the LEM, landing and coming back up, there was no way other than that engine getting you back out of there. So that was always a critical point in the flight, to see that engine work to see them on the way home.
So another first moment that you were a critical part of was the Enterprise.
Right.
So tell me about, first of all, I guess for people who have a little different, maybe this generation that I'm in and the generation that follows me seems to have a different interpretation of our control over our career path.
Okay.
And, and how we think we're building our career. So right. you were doing that. You were an Apollo astronaut, and you were going to command Apollo 19.
Right.
And
I hope. Yeah.
You hoped, right. And then, so how did you respond when you found out none of that was going to be
right.
where you were headed?
Yeah, the way that was set up was I had gone after Apollo 13, I think within a month. Deke gave me my next job, and it told me I was the backup commander on Apollo 16, which put me in the 3-mission alignment, which add 3 to 16 and you get 19, which were real missions at that point in time. So I was assigned, and I was happy with it, Jerry Carr to be a Lunar Module pilot, and Bill Pogue, command module pilot, which has been great. That had been 2 Marines on the moon at the same time. I think that's been terrific. But at any rate, fate would have it after we were training about 4 months, and they canceled 18 and 19. So that went away. It was kind of second point of disappointment. And I finished up the training assignment with Ed Mitchell and Stu Rusa, who had come off 14. Deke assigned them to support me and fulfilling the backup assignment behind John Young, Charlie Duke, and Ken Mattingly. And when that was completed, again, I was thinking ahead, even at that time, of next career when I couldn't fly anymore for whatever reason. And I went to Al and Deke and talked to them about that thought. And they arranged for me to go to the Harvard Business School, through the PMD program for management development. And so I went up there was a 4-month pressure cooker kind of course, frankly, mostly geared to civil company type agenda, things they covered in marketing and sales and whatever. But anyway, it was a good training, but also in finance and budgets and things. So I asked for and got an assignment then to go to the Orbiter Project Office. So I left the astronaut office. I actually, just before that assignment, I actually worked on the shuttle proposal evaluations for a fellow named Bass Red. We did the integrated vehicle performance analysis of the 4 proposals that had been submitted by Rockwell, Grumman, Lockheed, and MacDac. So we went through to support the source selection board that ended up picking Rockwell and to build a shuttle. So then I went straight to work for Aaron Cohen, who was head of the Orbiter Project Office for 4 years. So I was out of the astronaut office in that role, more in program management with the design and development of space shuttle, Orbiter in particular. So I had that experience of and Aaron let me do some of the budget work, each budget cycle and that kind of thing to get a little more experience. And the program, and I was on the change boards. I was on part of the change board that looked at every engineering change that was done along the way. I virtually coordinated and ran an ops team on all the design reviews through critical design review on Enterprise and through preliminary design review on Columbia. And that's when they made the crew selections. So I was named with Gordon Fullerton to be Crew 1 for Enterprise, and Dick Truly and Joe Engel, Crew 2. Turns out Dick is from Mississippi, as I am. So I always like to point out that Enterprise never flew, but that there was a Mississippian aboard, all of the flights. But at any rate, so now it was the front end of getting ready to fly. We had no simulators working, so it's like starting from scratch. It was kind of nice because we were set off as a separate operation from the main program that was continuing on the path of getting Columbia ready to go to orbit. So I had Deke Slayton as the test director. Forget the fellow's name with him. His deputy was steeped in Edwards' flight test, McElmurray. He was Deke's deputy. I conned a lot of Kennedy people to go. I went down, Charlie Mars arranged me to meet in the mission briefing room. That's where they have the FRRs, flight readiness reviews for all the launches. I said, gather up, Charlie, all the people you think might want to go participate in the ALT. I said, it'd be good for Kennedy people to get some hands-on in the vehicle before it shows up an orbiter, before one shows up at Kennedy. So about actually ended up with 85 people from Kennedy, never done before. They normally showed up at the plants for big tests on the spacecraft, but they'd only pop in and look at that test, observe it, and then go back to Kennedy. So they didn't have the hands-on participation. So some of them became the lead test directors in the tests we did on Enterprise, like Bob Seek. Heard that name? Mm-hmm. Another fellow also became one of the early flight directors for launch at Kennedy. So it was kind of funny. It was arranged in the mission briefing room, and I prepared a slideshow. These people from Kennedy, I know it'd be kind of foreign to them going to Edwards in the desert. So the slideshow I prepared never showed any desert scenes except at dawn or dusk when it's kind of pretty. And I showed snow in the High Sierras, not the High Sierras, but also Tehachapi Mountains and San Jacinto Mountains back of LA. And I showed them Santa Monica Beach. And, you know, I showed them great scenes. Told them that was all within an hour of the station they'd be at Edwards. So anyway, I conned these people and their families, which they took over one apartment complex. They called it the KSC Ghetto at Palmdale, California. But anyway, they came and got a lot of good experience ahead of time about how an orbiter works, because they were hands-on into it. And so we had our test team. I pulled the best, called the best leftover Rockwell test conductor type people. So we really had a top grade A team overall. We were small in ourselves. We had the 4 of us. The prime crews are going to fly it, but we had Bob Bobko and Obermeyer, Bob Obermeyer as a support. We had Dave Ballard, my old system engineer, and others. And we had a small mission control ran by Don Putty. And they occupied actually the recovery room that was kind of offset to the main control room in Mission Control. That was their control room for Enterprise. But it had a suite of the right experts in that control room to handle the systems in Enterprise, which didn't have all of them that were going to be in the orbital bird. So it was a tight forming team, but at the same time, we knew a waterfront we had to cover early on was very broad and geographically displaced. Like our simulators were at Johnson, obviously, the prime moving base simulator, and the flight simulator, the STA, normally would fly it at White Sands or at Edwards. The test work was done, some of it at Johnson and the SAIL, and then we had the ADL at Downey, California, and of course the build-up and manufacturing of Orbiter and its filling out, finished manufacturing and testing now the systems in it were at Palmdale, California. So there's a lot of waterfront to cover among the few of us that were trying to cover this. I'm talking about among the crew. And so we split up and sort of took lead assignments like Dick Trulley and Bob Crippen, I think Ken Mattingly and Bob Coe, Hank Hartsfield. Spent a lot of time with the software. That was a prime. They were going to worry about IBM software getting built right. And I took on the vehicle testing at Palmdale, but I'd pull people in as needed for special tests because that was my forte back from all the work on the Grumman Lunar Module. Joe took over the simulator development, including the SDA, and flew some of the development flights with Grumman, developing the airplane even. So we spent some time just getting things refined again, the way we could really start testing what we're going to do and figuring out now here's what mission profiles are going to be, et cetera, which weren't very complicated. Obviously, launching off a carrier right aside the big lake bed. But at any rate, it was kind of a very fun program. It was very efficient. Bob Seek tells me that was the most fun time he's ever had in his career. And he said it was fun because there was no bureaucracy of any sort. You had so much authority, ability to do what you needed to do. So he felt, that's the way he described how he felt working that aspect as see, he got involved even the launch day. He or the other Kennedy guys, about 4 of them that were the lead guys, they would actually get the vehicle ready, if you want to call it, to launch. In other words, to get it ready to be taxied out on the 747. So they were there just like Mission Control would be at Houston. Then the turnover to Putty and his group when we were going to get airborne. So it was kind of worked in that same way for these flights. So anyway, it was exciting times in that respect. Now, the day of launch was very high. For me, I felt a lot of pressure, more so than I felt on Apollo 13 on that launch, or from a different aspect than most people would think. It was not the safety, at least for myself or Gordo. We were sitting in ejection seats, so we had a good plan B. But we were at a point in the program where we had changed presidents. We'd gone from Nixon, who was in this, and the shuttle program was Nixon's program, quote, whatever. And Carter, Jimmy Carter, President Carter had come in. Within a couple of months of his inauguration, he canceled the B-1 bomber. That scared us a little bit. It's not connected with shuttle, but it's aerospace. And there had never been anything in the election, in the debates or discussions about space to speak of in that whole. So we didn't really know where these past or future president felt in that regard. And NASA at the same time, in that same time frame, I can't remember the relative to the time we flew that day, but had to announce almost a 2-year slip in the orbital schedule because of the tile problem. And so with that facing us, I was wondering, my fear was, had we crashed or damaged Enterprise because we had no backup vehicle, which is not normally you don't want in a test program, but we had canceled it for cost. We had a backup vehicle way back when, but for cost saving early on, we cut it out of the program. That this flight, if it failed, could be the cause of the cancellation of the shuttle program right there. So I had that sort of on my mind, approaching that day, and that time we climbed aboard. It was reflected by other people's thoughts and the fact on each side of the ladder we climbed up from the lower hatch to get into the ejection seats, there was a Polaroid picture of a figure in a blue flight suit like we were wearing, and they had a helmet on their heads, and the oxygen mask dangling loose, but the visor down, so you couldn't tell who these people were, but it was meant to be me and Gardo. And we're sitting on these huge sweepers in a hangar, the kind of sweepers you think of as cleaning a big, huge metropolitan city street. And the sign there said, if you follow this up, well, actually it was a different word I won't say here. If you follow this up, this is your next job. So the workers are also worried about how this thing would go. So anyway, that was launch day for Free Flight 1. Of course, as we all know, it went beautifully. The flight control, which we designed gained highly to be good handling qualities, it flew better than anything we had seen in the shuttle training aircraft or any of our simulations, engineering simulations. So it flew very well. So they did a good job on the flight control system design. And we had a backup, actually, a simplified backup system we could have reverted to call it Get It on the Ground system, which we did not have to use. Kind of plan C was the ejection seats. Plan B was to switch to the backup control system. But at any rate, it worked beautifully. We didn't hit the 747. And if it weren't about safety, that was the only safety concern I had was for the 747 crew. If for whatever reason we'd have gone out of control right after separation, because that's the first time we're going to know how this flight control system worked. If we had hit the 747 and damaged it sufficiently, they would have not got out. So we would have lost the 747 crew. So they were the ones that took the, if you want to call it, heavy personal risk, not Gardo and I. So anyway, that's the way the program went. It was a very successful program overall. We finished it 2 months. We flew that first free flight within 2 weeks of a schedule that had arbitrarily been set 2 years before. So we were only 2 weeks late, calendar-wise, on that first release flight. And the program finished 2 months ahead of time. Eight test flights we flew. So for a test flight program, it was a highly successful program. Compared to a lot of early airplanes have problems in their early testing phase.
Do you think that maybe the success of that aspect of it, of the efficiency, do you attribute that to the lack of bureaucracy and the empowerment that people felt?
No, I wouldn't say lack of bureaucracy. That maybe speeded some things up, but no, it's clearly we had the right people assigned. We had the right mix of NASA people, the best contractor people. So we had kind of an A team overall. And that's what I think allowed all of that to go the way it went.
That's probably true in every business.
Oh, yeah. Yes, no question. Yeah, the bureaucracy won't stop good people from getting it done. It may slow them up a little bit, but they will get the job done if you got the right people.
That's probably one of my favorite quotes. That and Plan B being get it on the ground. I wrote that down to myself. I should develop that into every single thing I do. Oh, goodness. So let's think about then fast forwarding, because I know you've had an incredible career, but one of the passions that I've seen the few times that you and I have been together is your passion for inspiring young people and education. And you and I were talking earlier today about the conversations you've had with classrooms around the world. So talk to me a little bit about that connection, who you've connected with around the world, and what you want them to know.
Well, I don't think it's a specific connection per se. It's just a thought I have that I'm not going to be around much longer. And there's amazing, incredible, big challenges the world and the human race will continually face. I mean, right now we have this so-called pandemic, but it's not the last pandemic. There'll be others. Over history, there's been a number of them, some much worse than this one. And so there'll be that kind of challenge. There's no telling if we'll be facing a meteorite or comet getting in our way. We obviously have a lot of media about global warming, on and on. So there's challenges, and most of the challenges that we face and solutions, therefore, are not solved in congressional hearings. They're solved by right people, again, and mostly with a technical science or engineering background or medical background that can take on and work these issues. And so I really thought of, in science and aviation museums, to me, are suitable museums more than some to stir that imagination in the people that may have that particular gene in them to be that side of the brain or whatever, to steer them into a career in engineering or science. Because we're going to need an abundance of that talent to grow up and be available as these things happen in the future. And so I guess maybe I'm sort of more philosophical than otherwise, because I'm not going to be around. I'd like to be around to help out, in fact, but I won't be. But at least I'll have had a hand in helping some people prepare, or their generations be ready to go when they need to go to bat.
Goodness. So what do you say to these students in your Skype interviews and when you're talking to them?
I never try to talk a child into being an engineer or scientist, because I think that has to be, I tell them basically that they've been blessed and born with talent. Everyone has been born with talent, unless unfortunately they have some birth defect or whatever that might be a problem. But generally, most healthy people have talent, and I tell them the thing they need to work hard at as they're going to school, and is to concentrate on how they can best utilize that talent to the good, from several standpoints, for the good of maybe the country or their community or the world at large, but also for their own well-being and satisfaction and happiness. Because I think people are happier if they feel a part of something and can look at an accomplishment or something they've been a part of and done, and see the fruit of that. So I try to tell them, because that's a big part of their life, because they're going to be working at something in some career, and they may as well be in one they like to do. And so it makes everything happier and easier. If you need to work harder to further education or training, it'll seem more fun than work. If you're geared to what your aptitude is and you're ready to do, and you'll obviously generally be more successful in your life and that career path if you're got the right aptitude. So that's what I try to tell them. Not to say I want you to be an aeronautical engineer or whatever, but just do the best you can make of what talent you've been born and blessed with.
That is an incredibly wise perspective, because I think that too often we try and channel ourselves into what we think the world might want us to be, rather than what
or the parents want you to be, or whatever. Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, so you addressed the fact that science and space museums are in a unique position, and I agree, just because we tell the stories that are so inspiring that lay that foundation for the future.
And show the results in a past history sense, but some pretty magnificent results of what has happened, and now is history, and aspects of what has happened. Yeah.
Right. So right now, all of us are struggling a bit. You know, your favorite museum in Mississippi, and all of us that count on tourism are struggling. So why should we survive? Why do you think it's important?
Well, I think that's an avenue that fits well, like I said, particularly K through 12, to marry with schools and the whole education process. Obviously, we have a large number, and our curator didn't mention it, but briefly mentioned it. But we have a very large number of field trips a year from schools for that exposure and some learning. I call it museums. I think the kids get some sort of sneakily learn things without realizing they're learning it, and have fun while they're learning it. So I think it's they're good in that respect, and I think it's lasting. I think when they, particularly some of the artifacts they see, it's not just a passing fancy, particularly those with that right aptitude. It sort of sticks in there. And so it's a lasting thing as well, in that exposure they have, where museums are showing things that can be done by the right people that have been done, that they ought to consider being a part of in the future. So I think, and I say they marry very well. Museums, hopefully, if geographically placed, can marry well with the regular formal schooling that's going on across the country in K through 12.
Agreed. Okay, so let's bring it home and talk about the Cosmosphere.
Right. Okay.
So tell me about just your association with us, how it started, and what you think of the Cosmosphere.
Well, the Cosmosphere is obviously unique. It's unique in terms of your location, which, as you say, you're kind of a jewel there sitting in the centroid of the country. The only museum like it. It's unique, and obviously how it grew up with a science, obviously, theme, with the thought of astronomy and having a planetarium. That's certainly a science. And grew from there, and have, I would say, if you can, for instance, a Russian collection you have in stories, if you blended yourself with Tom Stafford's museum, y'all would have by far the best Russian set of stories anywhere in the world, bigger than anything in the world. And because you do have an outstanding Russian exhibit, set of exhibits and stories, piece of the Berlin Wall there, sitting, of that age. And then you obviously have grown up the space side considerably. And I'm happy because you have only one capsule, but it happens to be Apollo 13, which I spent some time in over 6 days. And so I'm pleased with that, which has, again, a lot of it's not just the artifacts, it's the stories and how you present the stories behind that, either in static media or in videos or whatever means that can get it out and into the brains of your visitors and guests. So that's, and I think your Cosmosphere is very well done in that respect.
The October 4th is the 63rd anniversary of Sputnik. That's when we're having our telethon.
Oh, yeah.
So what are your memories of Sputnik, and how do you think the world reacted?
Okay. That's a funny story. On Sputnik, I was at the University of Oklahoma at the time in school housing at North Base. I was really in old Navy barracks that had World War II that were left over, and they converted them into student apartments. And all at once, this pounding was on my door, and this fellow who actually ended up in as a commercial graphics marketeer, and through his schooling and his occupation, but nevertheless was excited. He pounded the door. I was worried something really bad had happened. I mean, he was so excited. And that's what you tell me, this thing is going around overhead and it's making beeping noises. And finally got him slowed up enough to realize he's talking about a Earth satellite. And so that was my remembrance of that day. And until I got to where I could get more information about it, and realized that this is probably a breakthrough. I didn't think of humans at the time. I've ever been in space, but I said, there'll be bigger and better things that can be done with satellites, which can obviously every revolution go around the Earth and cover a lot of territory. That these will become useful somehow to do things to help us down here. So that was my thoughts, at that specific time. I wasn't worried like some people. I guess some people got paranoid about it and thought that we'd be dropping bombs on us or something. I had no sense of that at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now, look, you are exactly right. The satellites are making possible part of this conversation, our cell phones and everything else.
Oh, yeah. Incredible.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, in fact, we're in big trouble if they went away. And, yeah, we'd be in big trouble.
Right. I don't know how we'd communicate. We'd have to go back to smoke signals. So what have I missed that you would want? What are your favorite memories, or what would you want people to take away as they think about the legacy of Fred Haise?
No, I think they think about Fred Haise as a very lucky guy. As we talked earlier, I got steered accidentally into the profession I ended up with in aviation and space. So not by plan, but by accident. And that obviously has been a great career. I got to enjoy, from my management training, a great career, 17 years in business world. I was with Northrop Grumman, headed space programs, and there we had manufacturing shuttle wings. We built the manipulated foot restraint, the thing on the end of the RMS arm you've first seen astronauts perched on, for example. I ended up starting a service company for Grumman and got into a fairly wide variety of business with that. At one time, I left the company briefly to run the system integration engineering contract on Space Station Freedom for 4 years. So I was involved in Washington, D.C. on early space station 4 years with that effort, which incidentally was problem. It was fraught with problems with funding, was not adequately supported, and a lot of management changes within NASA going through those early years. And so that chapter in my book, I labeled my time in purgatory, because that's what I felt about that time. And eventually it got on the right path when the Russians joined the program effectively to solidify the funding and in the U.S. And they got the show on the road, which I was happy to see. It's a thing that, looking ahead downstream, I felt one thing you give credit for Space Station, not acknowledged too much, is the work that was done with the call it the interface control documents are the things that very meticulously label the details of things matching up or mating, because this thing had to be constructed on orbit without ever having seen each other on the ground, on Earth. So that was always a scary thing for me of the whole operation, was to make sure something didn't get up there with the shuttle and then it didn't fit or whatever. So that was a great learning experience of that, which I look at fits probably more than we think about now, with eventually the kind of things, if we truly are going to move outward in any permanent way to things like Mars, places like Mars, eventually you're going to need much bigger things going back and forth logistically supporting than people think about right now. I mean, I think the mindset right now is almost no more than going and picking up some rocks. But if you're going to go there and create a colony, for instance, you're going to need much larger things going back and forth. and they will probably need assembly. So I thought the space station had some learning experience in that regard for future things. And of course, the other thing that they are doing is collecting a lot of statistical data on human beings and zero gravity for significant lengths of times, and are finding things out there, some not so good. In fact, they're going to have to worry about it. Because a big question for the even longer range trips would be, do you have to somewhat rotate the spacecraft up to create a gravity field, which you can do. It's an added complication. But so I thought the space station certainly serves, if you think of further out in other things, it serves a role there that's not acknowledged directly in that sense too much, you know. So I enjoyed my experience there, but like I say, it had some tough times those early years, surviving really from the funding. And there was tough morale with the people I was recruiting, staying on the job, that kind of thing. They're worried the program wasn't going to make it. One year in Congress, if one vote had flipped in the House, one vote, there would be no space station today. So that was the kind of, that's the times I was talking about. And so it was, in that sense, it was a tough program in those early days of freedom.
Well, thank you so much. And one way or another, we're going to celebrate the Apollo 13 again at the Cosmosphere.
Thank you.